Welcome, everyone, back to Unfiltered Unqualified. Today, we're with Joseph, Nephi, and Kyla, and me, of course. We're going to be talking about what makes a good man. Joseph is what makes a good man.
That's it. On point. It really is really good.
I just try to be like Nephi. I'm his wicked older brother.
Oh, yeah.
No. So good. Taught me everything I know. I know.
Oops. Oh, no, I spoiled it. Oh,
well. That was my answer.
Say,
that was my answer.
Think of someone who is a good man, and who are they? And then I was going to predict your response, and it was going to be Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to the throne of Gondor, because he's a good man. But who are you actually thinking of? Who is a good man, would you say, in your lives?
I really do think you guys are great men in my lives. I definitely put that out there. Yeah, I think you guys, I think our fathers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of like putting different categories and answering questions like this. Yeah, family, definitely you guys. Father was the first one I thought of. Overall, right? You got Jesus. That's the separate category because that's a kind of a given.
The ultimate good man.
I'm such a fan of Gandhi. I love Gandhi so much. When I watched his documentary, I felt like it changed my life. That man in underwear is so powerful.
I mean, it's likely that Jesus did his most amazing stuff, like getting crucified and all that, in his underwear too. So I think there's a lesson to be learned there.
Holy cow, we got to strip more often. That is when the important things in life happen.
Oh my goodness. I did not need to know that, married people.
I love it. So while we're talking today, just think about some qualities of what makes those people good men. What makes your dad a good man? What makes Gandhi a good man? So keep that in the back of your head while we're doing this. But who are some good men in your life, babe?
Well, I would definitely say you and my dad. Part of that, I think, is probably because you two are the men that I'm closest to. And you've been great examples for me. But yeah, like Joseph's bringing up, I think there's like more famous good men like Gandhi. But on a personal level, I'd probably just say you and my dad. And I mean, lots of people, but those are my top two.
Fair enough. Love it. All right. So we're going to go through a few quotes from philosophers from different areas of life. So the first one, we got Plato. Joseph, could you read that one for us?
The measure of a man is what he does with power.
And Nephi, could you read the next one?
A good man is kinder to his enemy than bad men are to their friends.
Kyla?
A good man does not worry about praise or blame.
Okay, so we have some good definitions there. Would you agree with these definitions? Are they pretty solid?
I think out of a war context, I would agree. I think in a war context, I think I would disagree with Joseph.
What do you mean in a war context?
Like if the US and the Soviets ended up going to war, like no longer Cold War, but straight up hot war, I do think that I would rather kill the enemy than I would imagine that the Soviets would be doing to their people. If that makes sense.
I think I'm following. So like you'd rather, if we went to a war with them, you would rather just kill the enemy, and then, but you think that the Soviets would, or the Russians would treat their own people worse than we would treat them?
I guess what I'm saying is, when I think of that quote, a good man's kinder to his enemy than a bad man are to their friends, I think during war, the Soviets would have, like, even if there were bad men in the Soviets or bad men in the US, I think they would have treated their friends in a way that wouldn't have killed their friends. Whereas
Mm,
as the US and Soviets would be enemies at that point and literally killing each other, I think that that's not necessarily treating them kinder than their friends would be.
yeah, that's fair.
So that's why I think that outside of that context, I would agree.
What about prisoners of war? Would that be too outside of the context for what you're saying?
I don't think so.
Because you can still treat prisoners kindly, right?
Yes, for sure. That is true.
All right. And then we're going to finish off these quotes with the last one from Marcus Aurelius. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. And we are, in fact, going to waste time and talk about what being a good man is for the entire podcast.
I love how you start
Because I think it's
rather than
important.
ending with this as like an inspirational message. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty ballsy. How funny.
Yeah, we're going to do it anyway, just because it's fun.
Take that.
So I want to go through and just list some specifics. What makes a good man, and what makes a bad man a bad man? So think about the people that we said that, mostly our fathers, the people around us are good men. What makes those people good men?
I think selfless.
Okay.
I think having integrity.
Integrity. I don't
Initiative.
know why it's not showing up.
I think you, by posing this question, have some assumptions, Tanner. Pulling back on my very outdated, half asleep when learned philosophy knowledge that I have, attributing like these
He says
attributes.
as he holds a whole bachelor's in the degree.
That's
Mhm.
why it's extra embarrassing, but I don't remember the names of like this very basic theory. But I think virtue theory is talking about that, like, yeah, you gain virtue by having specific individual traits and whatnot. Well, you're asking us to list out here. And I don't think I necessarily agree with the very premise. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
So you don't think that good men have good traits? There are not specific traits that good men typically have?
I don't think there's specific traits that are inherently good. I think traits are like tools, like hammers, What makes them good or bad is what they're used for. Like it's like the idea of every virtue has a vice, Like
Yeah.
someone. Yeah, that's basically it.
So I guess when would be an example of it would be bad to have integrity?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, evil people with integrity can get stuff done. It's not you don't want evil people to be dependable to each other and to be able to organize and communicate and to depend on each other, like the.
So it depends on how you synergize them, is what you're saying, right? Because I think we could all agree that just if one person has one of these traits, that doesn't define them as a good or bad person, but that it's the working together through the different.
Or I think you could probably go both ways, Nephi, because I think you could say that the person who's hiding Jews in their attic, and when the Nazis come knock on their door and they say, yes, the integrity of my soul demands that I have Jews in here. I think that's a great example where.
Or would it be, would he be showing more integrity by not telling the Nazi because he is upholding a promise he's made to those people that he is already decided to house?
Right. I think we shouldn't confuse integrity with honesty because that's another trait altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, that's interesting. How are you defining integrity? I definitely feel like honesty is how I normally, not like, maybe not honest, like, is it doing what you say you will do? Is that integrity? Because again, in that case, I guess you could say just whenever there's a conflict, the things that you say you'll do, if you say that you will obey the law, you pledge allegiance to the flag, but then if the government does something you're against, like you can just see. I guess I'm just trying to say it's not impossible, I think, to imagine scenarios to where you wouldn't want to have a certain trait because it could be detrimental in achieving an ultimate end that you desire.
Right. So what trait would
Be
would you say that would work with your definition there?
any of them. I think that any of these traits could be desirable or not, depending on what's going on.
Context.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That's fair.
this might be too much. This might be too much of a rabbit hole, but for what you were going for, and if that is the case, I apologize. But that was my very unfiltered thought there for you.
That was good. I think ultimately I do agree with you, Joseph. I think I do agree. That depends on the context of how these are being used. Yeah.
It does depend. I'm saying more like in general, because like with Gandhi, he was a very selfless man. He had integrity, right? I'm just thinking general traits for like an outline for what our kids could follow on things that they could, or traits that they could work towards in order to try to become good men.
And I would add charity to the list.
Yeah,
Still adding to
you
the
basically add any Christ-like attribute, right?
Yeah. Hashtag gospel.
The PS notes you can add for me then for our kids is I think that what makes you good versus bad is all in the eye of the beholder who's judging you, of course. And I think the criteria is, are you making me happy or are you making me sad? And if you're making me happy, you're a very good person. If you're making me sad, that's my theory. But which I think can work with this idea of the traits, right? That I guess I'm saying when you are saying in general, someone with these traits, I think is already assuming a preconceived idea of someone who is using these traits for good things. That what you're thinking of, yeah, they're going to use it for good. Someone who, I don't know, when we think of these different ways we see people. That's why God is good and we love God, because God wants to make everyone happy, and that's why his enemies don't like him, because even though God has the perfect list of virtues and characters, what God does makes them sad, makes them mad, and so God is bad. That's my proposal.
So is there any form of objectivity? Can there be an objective measurement of good and bad?
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of that. Not typically. I think that typically what's defining morality is a matter of what's making you happy or sad.
So you don't think society could ever reach a unanimous consensus on what makes a good man, because it's all subjective.
I mean, probably, or like at the very least, to short answer, yes. Long answer, like you can, I don't know, like describe a specific circumstance in which after describing it, it's like, oh yeah, that's a good person. But if you break down the specifics and what's my thought? Well, okay, so you can think of something like murder. Yeah, everyone, I think if you ask, yeah, murder's wrong. But now it's like, oh yeah, so when we assassinated Osama, oh my goodness, I feel embarrassed. I'm not pronouncing it. Thank you, Osama bin Laden. That was bad there, right? No, we don't think so. But his people sure thought so. I mean, who's the
Well,
guy? What's
I
the name
guess
of
it
the dude
depends
who
on your
started?
definition of murder, right?
Well, what's the name of the guy who started World War One because he assassinated what's his
Mm.
bucket? To this day,
He was the
he
Prince of
is like,
Austria, assassinated, right?
yeah, but the guy who shot him to this day, man, I don't remember their ethnic group. Were they like they
It
weren't
was
Turks, were
Gavrilo
they?
Princip.
Gabriela Princep is like to this day like an ethnic clash that was going on between them in Austria, um, and to this day amongst his group, he is seen still as like a glorious, amazing revolutionary for assassinating him, and we see him as the guy who started the worst war the world's ever seen. You know,
The war to end all
so
wars.
Mm.
I think that's great.
yeah. So
So then
I'm
there's no
gonna stop
universal
now.
definition. You don't think? You think it's
I
you think
think
that's culturally based, or is it universal that it's that we just think it's subjective because of our culture?
I think that at that point, well, I'll let Joseph answer that. Sorry.
I just think that the only thing that's universal is the definition that good is what you define as good is what you think will make you happy, and what you define as bad is what you think will make you sad. Emphasis on the word think
Well, look, the thing
there.
is, like, if I'm like, well, I want to go kill millions of Jews because that would make me happy, so it's good then.
For you think so. Yeah, but I'm trying to I'm not trying to say that something is good or bad. I'm trying to explain how people decide what's good and what's bad. And I think the way people decide what's good and what's bad is by first deciding what's going to make me happy. And that's what um, they decide is good.
I don't know if I agree with that, because then anyone could just go into a court trial and say, oh, well, this is a good thing because I believe it's good. But then of course the court's not going to say that. So then,
I mean,
so
we
is it
totally
not
do
good
that.
because the court says it, or?
I don't know if I'm expressing it correctly, but I guess kind of with your example, I'm thinking of the Japanese internment camps during World War II. Now you ask anyone, right? And it's all like, oh yeah, that was bad. Oh yeah, that was bad. People back then, they did not care about right A, B, C, X, Y, Z. You know, they were like, we are at war. These people, we perceive them as a threat, and we need to contain the threat. You know, it's just boom, boom, boom. And if the same thing happened today, I think we do the exact same thing. If Mexico got so mad at tariffs and this border crackdown with the cartels, and it got to a point to where we, as a public hysteria, thought that there were terrorists among the Hispanic populations in the country. Actually, legitimately, maybe this wouldn't happen because logistically that'd be a way bigger deal than the Japanese population at the time. There's way more Hispanics in the country. But I think we're the same kind of people now as we were in the past. And push comes to shove, we would do it. You know, does that make sense? Like what we decide is good. I think of the Spartans, how the Spartans would kill babies that the elders perceived as being born weak. Like what a atrocity we view, you know? But for them, can't you imagine how in their minds, like there are few things as virtuous and honorable as parents to let your child go who would just be a burden on our society for the good of the community, for the good of Sparta, for our ability to thrive and to grow. You know? I don't know if that's the exact words they thought, but
It definitely could
yeah,
be.
yeah. So
What if I reframe the question? What is generally in society do we claim to be good traits and bad traits?
In
So
the
I
US,
think that generally we would say that these are good traits when used effectively.
and well, I guess I'm not trying to disagree with you. I think what you're saying and what I'm saying work perfectly together. I guess I'm just trying to explain that this appeal to popular opinion. I
It's
guess I'm
not
trying
the
to
way you
explain.
should decide good and bad, right?
Well, I'm trying to explain how I think it's decided. Yeah, when you say generally in society what's seen as good and bad, I think that happens. But as personal people too, you know, when we decide that music A or movie B, we don't want to participate in that, like, and our next door neighbor who is a good person who we love, that's our favorite movie. It's like, hmm, we just have different perceptions of what we think will make us happy or not. But
I
I've
agree. I
been on
agree.
this I've been on this soapbox for a long while, and I can tell that it's definitely a rabbit hole for you. So
No, you're
I'll turn the rest
good.
of the mic. I'll turn the rest of the mic to Kyla, and just let it be a solid, confusing, and unconclusive end for this topic for the moment. For you.
Got any thoughts? It's okay if not.
I have thoughts, but I don't know if it's the direction you want to go, because I keep thinking in a more religious context that God is kind of the overall decider of what's good. And I think that we are meant to follow that rather than what we think is good. Because I think God's version of good is better than anything my version of good would look like.
Right. I think I agree with you. I've always had an issue with like just accepting arguments based on authority because those aren't good arguments, you know? Like I agree that God has the best ideals, but why are they the best ideals? You know? Does that make sense?
Well, it's like Joseph was saying with people thinking, oh, what's going to make me happy? God knows what's going to make people happy. He also had a whole mortal experience at one point. He is all-knowing and knows more than we do. So I trust that. Kind of like with our own parents, at some point we grow old enough that we realize, hey, they actually know stuff. They were kids once. They were young marrieds once. So, you know, we start to listen to their advice that we think is good.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's good to be brainwashed or blindly following authority or anything, but we can understand why we should follow them, then we want to follow them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my thought there.
Cool. Any more thoughts here? Okay, sweet. So then we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but is being good an act or a state of being? Are we just generally good people, or is it the actions you take that make you a good person?
I think you can have both, but I think they mean different things. I think
Expound.
if the act is achieving a goal or moves you towards a position or circumstance that you would like, then I think you could say that that is good, a good act. In that case, it would just be that. But as far as a state of being, I think that's less defined by the situations or the circumstances and more upon that perspective. That idea of whether you feel you are, by feel I mean not just emotionally, but intellectually, on a spiritual level, in your soul, if you feel like you are aligned with your values, if you feel like you're in that state of where you should be. I think once you introduce the word should, then that implies the morality, the good versus bad, without that necessitating an act.
I think that's the light of Christ. Right? We're all born with that, with kind of this innate idea of what's right or what's wrong.
Yeah,
What do
I
you
like that, Kyla.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot. I think that especially in the context of like what Joseph had said earlier too, I think that works well with each other because principles such as like being hardworking or a good leader or kind to loved ones, like those are good things that can be applied in different circumstances, that depending on the acts, we might see them as being good versus evil. But both of the parties within those circumstances would probably think them as good. And that state of being good, I think, is where God, like you said, Kyla, understands everything. And he understands that to these people, they truly believe that they were doing good. And so with that lens of judgment, he would be better able to determine what good had come of that.
Right. Which is, I think, why God says, leave the judgment to me. Don't judge each other.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so I think that also further shows that it has to be a state, because if it is an act of, oh, this is good, like an accomplishment of good, when you have two parties that are going for opposite things, one has to be good and one has to be evil. And so good must win or evil must win. But within those parties, how is it possible then that each of them feel that what they're fighting for is good? So I think that's where it as an act is less tangible, whereas the state of being is really where you're at. Because if both parties feel like they're really seeking that good, then, as you said, Kyla, God would be able to identify that. I don't know.
Love it.
What are y'all's thoughts?
Yeah. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I really liked Nephi's right out of the gate distinction between a good act and a good state of being. And I think I agree with him on both points. If I am summarizing correctly, Nephi, that a good act is essentially like you have your goal, and whatever action is bringing you closer to your goal, well, that's how you know it's a good action, because it's getting you closer to your goals. And then a state of being is separate. And I think that I often like to think of defining love as when someone else's happiness makes you happy. That's how you know you love someone. And so I think the state of being good is just, when your happiness is derived from other people's happiness, when that's what you're seeking. That's just a good state of heart, regardless of your action. Your action might be helpful or it might be even hurtful, but if you're trying to help other people have happiness, I think that's a good state of being.
I like that.
Yeah. So I guess, so what you're saying there, Joe, is you could define it as putting other people's happiness above your own is what makes a good man, or is part of what makes a good man.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like the wording to this specifically, that others people's happiness is what makes you happy even. I just think that's sometimes that's maybe where when people forget the part that it's supposed to make you happy, that's where, I don't know, like people can often feel so guilty and self-loathing over, oh, I am not doing enough good or helping other people enough, when I think the end goal of a righteous life is to be happy, and that's what you're going for, and that's okay. So
Yeah, I agree with you guys. I think those are pretty solid definitions. So then moving on to the next bit, we're going to decide whether or not some people are good men or not. You guys ready for it? Okay. So first up, we have JFK playing the PlayStation 4. Is that a good act? No, I'm just kidding.
Wait,
it's just a Photoshop picture.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, it's a Photoshop picture of him playing the PS4. So
I knew they didn't.
Like, what?
I knew there wasn't a PlayStation 4 when he was alive, but I didn't even think there was like a controller. You have me there, though, Tanner. That was pretty good.
Yeah, I just thought it was a funny picture. But
That is awesome.
We're gonna dive into JFK real quick and see if he's a good person or a good man specifically. So I'll read this, and then Kyla, if you want to read that next bit, yeah. So JFK is often remembered as one of America's most charismatic and visionary leaders. His presidency symbolized hope, progress, and a new era of leadership. He led the U.S. through the Cuban Missile Crisis, preventing nuclear war, and he inspired Americans with the goal of reaching the moon and pushing for civil rights progress. He advocated for racial equality at a critical time, and his speeches, filled with optimism and calls for service, made people believe in the power of leadership for the greater good.
The private.
Oh, wait, hold on, sorry.
Okay.
So, based on what you know about JFK, because you all been to school, you know who JFK is. You've heard, "We will land on the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard." Would you say that JFK is a good man?
I think that it depends on what I want to eat. Like, if I was to point to him, to my kid, and say this is a good man, it would just depend on what I'd want to highlight. If my kid didn't feel very charismatic, they didn't have many friends, or felt like they were having a hard time standing up to bullies who were a bunch of generals that really wanted to nuke Russia. Like, I think it'd be a great example. If I had a kid who maybe was struggling with infidelity or something like that, he would not be the example,
Exactly. Because of this next section. Do you want to read that, Kyla?
Oh.
But behind the polished image was a deeply flawed man. JFK was notorious for his extramarital affairs, including alleged relationships with celebrities like Marilyn Monroe. His reckless personal behavior was an open secret among those close to him. There were also concerns about his health, hidden from the public, including Addison's disease and a reliance on medications that may have influenced his decision-making.
All right. So there's two sides to him. He is a great leader, a great person to inspire people. He was a great negotiator in every sense, but in his personal life, he was terrible. And his wife, Jackie, probably had to deal with a lot of crap because of it. So then, yeah, would that make him a bad man? Because he shows a good front to most people, but then in his personal life, he made some very, very poor decisions. Or like Joseph said, is it just in the context? Is he a good man for the country, but then is he a bad man in his marriage?
And
Poor character.
I think
Mm-hmm.
if I were to do short answer, I think I would tell my kids, yes, he's a good man, because I have grown and come to the opinion that I think he was trying to make the world a happier place than versus a sadder place. And in many ways, the fact that he had vices, is such public and well-known vices, is potentially, depending on the kid, why he's even a greater example to be like, look, like, life's real. You suck at some things and you're better at others. So in that regard, great. But yeah, that's where like, genuinely, in my personal life, I have a hard time calling anyone a bad man, because I have a hard time truly trying to think of someone who's not just trying to be happy.
Okay. Hitler, bad man, good man.
My understanding of his personal views is he was also just a man trying to be happy and trying to make the people that he cared about happy. And why would you call
Hitler
him
thinks, or Joseph thinks Hitler's a good man. Put that in the books, guys.
Anyone going for unfiltered?
I like where you're coming
just,
from, though, Joseph. I do
like,
agree. I think that there's so many dimensions that it's hard to qualify. Like, if we were to say that along the dimension of loving thy fellow neighbor and not killing them, then I would say, well, even then it could still be confusing, because I don't know how well Hitler loved his fellow neighbor as far as any immediate family or friends or yeah. But as far as like towards the Jews, yeah, we have a very clear indicator along that measurement, right? And so I see where you're coming from, Tanner, as well, of like, no, based off of like the societal perspective of creating a anti-Semitic system, how we view that as negative, which I do personally think is negative, then yeah, clearly wrong. But as for someone who thinks that we're creating a pure society, someone that's good, I feel like very, very similar parallels to Sparta, no? At least that perspective you shared, Joseph, then yeah, I can see why under that measuring scale, it's more difficult.
It seems like in almost
Yeah,
every example we brought up so far, there's like the personal bubble to look at and the public bubble. And they are almost always different for every man.
Mhm.
And Kyla, what you just said there made me think of Nephi's comment earlier, actually, when distinguishing a good act versus a good state. And I think it's probably a really good parallel for what you just said. I think in people's personal lives, that's when you're dealing with the state of a person. And I do think that people exist who just find joy from other sufferings. You know, I think those people do exist. And those are bad people. I think that is the definition of bad, of evil, finding joy in another's pain.
But if it
But
makes you happy by your own definition, that makes them a good person.
that's what they see as good, right?
Right.
I can still call them bad if I want, but yeah, it's what my thought process does is it explains why people think the way they do, you know. But when it comes to the more public life, like you were saying, Kyla, I think that's a little more of um, the quality of the action that we were talking about earlier, because you can say, well, their actions are good for what? Kennedy was good for stopping nuclear war. Kennedy was bad for giving us an example of a happy family life. You know, like, does that make sense? Like, just how I think it's interesting. That's just how, yeah, we were talking about the good or
act.
badness of an action. Yeah, the act versus the state of someone's desires and soul. I think that very few people have bad states. And then the individual actions themselves, it's just all really relative, depending on how you're measuring. Yeah. Who knows? Maybe Kennedy stunk at his job. I don't remember who he was running against, but if whoever he was running against got in there and convinced the whole world to get rid of all their nukes, then Kennedy epically failed because we're in a world with lots of nukes still. You know?
Comparison.
Mhm.
Yeah, you know? So it's interesting.
Yeah, there's some good points. So then moving on from JFK, I'm going to try to see if you guys can guess this one. He was a militant activist, and he used violence and sabotage to
Malcolm X.
overthrow a government. Sorry?
I said Malcolm X, but the U.S. government did not get overthrown. But is it Nelson Mandela? I always
So it's
think of
not
that
the
one.
U.S. government. He was labeled a terrorist, and including by countries, including the U.S., and the U.S. was keeping him on a watch list until 2008.
Until 2018?
2008.
Oh, 2008.
Mm-hmm.
Is that his name?
Don't
Nelson
say.
Mandela?
It
South
is
Africa?
Nelson Mandela.
No.
Yep. That is the
President
next
of South
guy.
Africa.
Mm-hmm. So Nelson Mandela, he was a militant, and he was imprisoned for, how long was it? 27 years for fighting against the government. And then he could have come out with all the bitter and hatred in the world, but he came out and he had optimism, and he led South Africa to a democratic system of government. And so you say that he is a good person, despite his violent crimes and his upbringing against the previous government.
Yeah, I think the ends justify the means.
Yeah, I think I would say that too. I think he made most people happy in South Africa. He was a pretty influential guy.
Yeah.
All right, next
I
one.
think
This one. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Any other thoughts on this?
I was just gonna say, yeah, I think that when you're talking about his actions, you can say he was good for what, and that can be yes or no depending on what the what is. And then as far as the state of a person, he was a freedom fighter till the end. How he fought was different, but hoorah, he if our founding fathers were thrown in prison for 27 years, that would have been them. They were terrorists. Yeah.
Right.
But it's the victors who get
Tell
to
the
write history.
stories. Isn't it so awesome that only the good guys have won every single battle in war? So awesome, dude. Anyway.
That's right.
All right.
There's a reason why good always beats evil, huh? Wow.
Mm-hmm. So this is one of the last ones that I want to talk about. Do you guys know this guy? His name is John Brown.
Mm-mm. Who's it?
Generic name ever.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Super generic guy.
Bloody Kansas.
Sorry?
Bloody Kansas, right?
I don't know what that means. Bloody Kansas.
John Brown. This is the guy who led the slave revolt.
Yes, it is the guy who
Mm.
led the slave revolt.
Good
You're
job.
100% right. I've never heard of Bloody Kansas before.
That's just his whole shindig that he did with the slaves has sparked a lot of fighting within the states that became known as Bloody Kansas.
I see. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And Joseph's right. But he was labeled as a terrorist and a violent fanatic by the U.S. government as well. And he led the raid on Harper's Ferry, which is an uprising against slavery in 1859. So a few years before the Civil War. And yeah, he was one of the earliest people to fight against slavery in like a violent way. Does that make him a good man to be killing people in order to free the slaves? Do the ends justify the means here, Nephi?
Well, it's just so funny because even in saying the ends justify the means, I was implying that there's like error in that logic, right?
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But even here, like, yeah, I don't want slavery, but I just, it goes back to the multidimensionality that I just can't comprehend people like God can. And I would love to be able to say like, oh yeah, good person. But then I go and find out that he actually went and raped all the white people, or he went and it was a terrible husband and father, or he also owned slaves and actually just led the uprising for his own economic profit. Things like that I'm like, the act didn't change, but it's the circumstances surrounding that act completely changed. And as I don't know all of them, based off what I do know, he was good.
Okay, so murder justifies good stuff. Love it.
I didn't say that. I said he was good.
Or murder is justified.
Nephi definitely agrees, chopping off them heads when on drunk people,
It's true. It's true.
Yeah, drunk people, that's a situation for sure.
Even wrote a book about it.
So then I guess we'll try to do a personal story time now.
Ah,
Are there any people that you've met in your lives where you're like, man, that's a good person? And then you've come out and you're like, huh, like after a few years or after you get to know them a bit better, you're like, that's not a great person. And I don't want to be like them or, talk to them at all anymore.
I have an example.
This isn't really
there.
a great example of that. Wait, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, you first. Mine was a silly joke, so you go ahead. Be serious.
Okay. Just with mine, it's not really about whether he's a good man or a bad man, but the actor for Sam Gamgee in Lord of the Rings?
yes.
Yeah, so he like, you think that he's gonna be like all Sam in person, right? And I got to meet him in person, and like the moment that he saw us, he just like shut down, folded his arms, didn't talk to us, and just like kind of like completely ignored us. Which we've met other celebrities and it was completely different, and so it was like, man, that's kind of rude, So that's not necessarily saying he's a bad person, but definitely that he is really good at acting like he cares. But yeah,
Tanner, I could
any other good
feel
stories that you
the
guys have about that?
I could feel the broken childhood dreams just seething out of your mouth in that story.
Yeah.
It really did, man. I really thought that Sam was going to be a good person, but no.
Out of everybody, even Gandalf, but oh man, Sam.
My silly story was I was gonna say, yeah, Tanner, I did vote for Trump, and I had, like, I think most people had lots of different backs and forths going on in my brain. And one thing that I was kind of hoping on was that he was just bluffing with all the tariff stuff. And the longer he's in there, the less it seems like he's bluffing. And I don't like the economy where it's going because of it. Ah!
But eggs have gone lower in price. That's all that matters.
Have they?
About like 50 cents.
I don't know where you're shopping.
Yeah, they can go up.
I was like, I don't know where you've been shopping, Tanner. This is a different country than mine. Yeah, I will say I think that not just a particular hero in general, but there definitely is a process in life of being just like, oh, they're normal people too, vices included. Not quite as amazing as you hoped, or I don't know. This wasn't even his fault per se, but I once went to a conference thing where where Elder Holland spoke. And after the conference, I like beelined it to the front of the stage, and I was like, "I'm gonna shake his hand. I'm gonna shake his hand." And his security guard just was pushing me back. Like, whoa, hold on, bub. Like, you just wait there for a bit. And I was like, I just want to shake his hand. He's doing that. What's going on? Just silence. And then Holland left. And I was like, shake my hand.
Oh, so sad.
The world didn't revolve around me, and he didn't do what I wanted telepathically. Yeah. So that is a painful, I'd say, a painful and really enlightening part of growing up. I guess it's painful in the moment when you realize that other people have problems, but then I think it's the enlightening and a happy part to realize that you can have your problems and also be a really good person. You can be someone else's hero.
I like that perspective. That's a good way to look at it.
Never meet your worshippers. How's that then?
That's it.
That's what Holland was
Just take their money. Just take their money. Give them your product virtually online, and buy a really nice mansion in the mountains far away from them.
It sounds like Andrew Tate. What about you, Nephi? Do you have any fun stories with this?
As far as like heroes go, none come to mind at the moment. But I think just a more close to home experience is in dating. I feel like oftentimes it's like, oh, I like the idea of this person. And then dating, and it's like, actually, I don't like this person. And move on.
Yeah,
That's
fair.
a great one.
That's why you got to date lots. For viewers watching at home, date lots of people.
Yeah, so that your hopes and dreams are crushed into proper expectations.
Exactly. You should never raise your expectations because then they will always be met.
Yeah.
All right. So then masculinity. This is a part of the male experience and affects female experiences as well. But what is masculinity? How would you guys define that? This is shifting gears a little bit, I know, but I think it's still fun.
You go first, Nephi.
Are you asking me what I think masculinity should be, or what I think society perceives masculinity as?
Why not both?
Okay.
Because I think what society views masculinity is typically like toxic masculinity, right?
I think there's definitely that as well, but I think that there's also good that can come from a societal perspective. Like, so for toxic masculinity, it's just the bad version of masculinity, I guess I would say. And I would say that society sees masculinity, for good or for bad, as someone who's strong, someone who acts in a confident manner, someone who can take initiative, leader roles, whether for like helping develop the team or for bringing others down. I think masculinity can be drawn to specific focuses, like on analysis rather than creativity. And I think that it also deals with the way in which people engage in societal norms. If that one person might be more masculine, then it's understood that they're the alpha.
Like this strong man.
Yeah, look at
Some
that.
said.
It looks like he's wearing a costume.
That's what I
Yeah.
said when
I
I
know,
saw that
right?
picture.
This is actually just Joseph in his off time.
It's so true. I believe it.
He puts on a mustache and he looks completely different.
I wouldn't say completely. I think
Wow.
he gets a lot of that muscle lift.
The like
I'm just
color
saying his
difference,
facial structure.
The face.
changes.
The face looks different. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
the color difference between like his face, his body, his hands, and especially his feet. It's like
Right. That's what I mean. It's like it's a costume. If you were to draw black lines around each of those points you said, Joseph, it would look like you totally just put on a suit.
yeah, seriously. Holy cow.
But I would say he looks pretty masculine, right? Like he's a strong dude, like Nephi says. So just to give the definition of masculinity, it is the characteristics, behaviors, and roles traditionally associated with men and with boys, and which varies across cultures and time periods. So I think you're right, Nephi. Like typically the men are expected to be the strong ones, to be the ones that handle the physical things, and they take care of the family, and they protect and provide and preside, all that stuff. I agree. So is it good to be masculine? What do you say?
Mhm. I think
Or is it
good.
better to be like this type of masculine, Mr. Rogers, you know?
Mr. Rogers. Yeah, I was just gonna say that I think it is good to provide for your family. I think it's good to protect your family. I think it's good to be a good example and a leader in society. But these are two very different ways of doing that. Yeah.
Thing is,
Yeah.
here you've got tough and you got tender. But I think a good man is both tough and tender.
So we should put Mr. Rogers'
I
face
like
on
it.
Chris
I
Brown.
like
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. I
And
love that we
honestly,
have
if you ask Mr. Rogers, I'm sure he wouldn't mind having a couple more pounds of muscle, you know. And I'm sure the guy on the left wouldn't mind being loved by moms around the whole world, you know, like
And having awesome sweaters too.
that.
and having awesome sweaters, great fashion taste. Yeah. Um, yeah, black thong. No, get wrong color choice, dude. Get a different one. But
It should have been bright pink.
I think that would have made a better impression, I think.
breast cancer awareness.
That's
Be an
it.
ally.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think that this a big characteristic that I often summarize and think of as masculinity, and honestly, though I don't know what the right word is, masculinity, but also just like womanhood, because it's the same thing, just adulting. I think just the defining feature of adulting is sacrifice. You know, sacrificing your own presence for future accomplishment and gain, and sacrificing your own wants for others. I feel like that is what separates children from adults in a very, very large degree, is an adult's willingness and ability to sacrifice their present for their future and sacrifice what they have and want for others.
You mean as far as like
Kids
someone who
don't do
acts
that.
like an adult and versus someone who acts like a child?
Yeah, and just both, 'cause, like a child and an adult. Because yeah, kids don't do that. Like I'm not blaming them. I don't really think they have much of a capacity to. They're a kid, and it's just like this is what I want, and that's their existence. And if they get what they want, then they're happy. And if they don't get what they want, they are mad. You know,
Mhm.
and obviously it's a spectrum, and it's not like you magically become an adult one day. It's a process of learning, um, sacrifice. But that is the truly people who I'm like, man, I want to be a man like them, are just people who I feel like I've seen sacrifice so much for something that they wanted, loved, or believed in, and it just inspires my soul. And I think that is some powerful masculinity to make me feel inspired. So,
I love it. Yeah. I think we can all get behind that. So then a few final questions that I want to talk about. Wait. Are we good men? Which I could try to get as many of us in the picture as we could, but that's all we had on the cruise. But yeah, are we good men?
I think we need to go on another cruise to determine that.
I think you're right.
love it.
What if we did
What
did a cruise podcast?
Haha, I love that. We just have a podcast every time we cruise, so it means we have to cruise every single week.
That'd
I
be
love
sick.
that. I love this distinction of the action versus the state. Easily, hands down, every one of those people in that photo, I think, are in the state of being a good man, easily. And then some of them are just better at different things than others. Caden definitely is the only one who was even trying to be fit in that photo. And so as far as the responsibility goes to take care of our bodies, like, he's doing great. Yeah, that's kind of my thought on that one. I think you are a great man, Tanner. I think you are a great woman, Kyla. And I think you are a great man, Yufai. And I view this podcast as an act of sacrifice of your time when you could go watch so many YouTube videos instead, especially on 2x speed, or play a really fun video game, or do the dishes that you've been meaning to do for forever. But instead, you are trying to document and record your thoughts that you think will benefit your kids. It's an act of sacrifice and love. So I appreciate the ability to partake in that with y'all. It's fun.
I agree.
Thank you, Joseph. Amen.
So I guess for our future kids, when they come up to you and they ask, well, how do I be a good person? What are you going to say to that?
Try to make other people happy, I think, is the easiest initial simple answer to do. When you're trying to make other people happy, that is being in a good state, I think.
And I would
Your
add
soul.
that. Sorry, didn't want to interrupt.
No, you're good.
Just wanted to add to that, not at the expense of being unhappy yourself. Because if you work so hard to make everybody else happy that you forget about yourself, then you're not happy. I think there is a level of, you do service, you do good things for others to help others be happy, and that can make you happy in return. But there is such a thing as burnout and things like that that can actually harm you more than help you.
And then if you don't have the capacity
I think
to do things, then that'll hurt others.
Yeah, but that's maybe a whole nother additional conversation. I agree with this, like, in general, the idea of helping others be happy can make you happy too. And then ideally everybody's happy. Rainbows and sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
No, I feel like I'm I stand corrected, Kyla. I think you're 100% right. What is the more primary, more foundational goal is to make yourself happy. It is. I do think that is the purpose of life, is to try and be happy. So I really appreciate the clarification there. We believe, and like you were saying, right, that yeah, trying to make others happy is typically a great way to go about making yourself happy. But the primary goal, the base foundational purpose of life is to try and be happy. And it's really important to figure out, what is it? What makes you happy? You know? And that is a journey indeed.
Okay. And I think we can think about it in the long term too, right? I mean, if we're chasing back to Jesus, who is the best of all men to have ever lived, right? I'm sure it didn't necessarily make him happy to be crucified. That was probably extremely painful. About the worst torture there is. But he knew he would be resurrected. He knew that that gave all of us the chance to live again and live with him again. And that probably makes him happy, thinking about having all of us home with him. And
Long-term
so
happiness
even
over
then-
short-term happiness, right?
Hmm?
Long-term happiness over short-term happiness.
Right. And so, I mean, that I think that we can even get into a whole conversation about happy versus joyful, because I think it brings God a lot of joy when we do things that are good that bring us back to him. And sometimes that does mean sacrifice. I mean, Jesus Christ's sacrifice was the greatest of all, and it was not fun at all, but it does get us all home eventually.
Amen.
Sorry, I could turn everything into a sermon. I was just working on the Come Follow Me for our Sunday school class tomorrow. So
That's awesome,
my brain
Paula.
is very much in the spiritual gear.
No, it's a good
It's
way to do
great.
it.
Yeah, I feel like
Hoorah.
honestly, that was awesome.
So what do you think, Nephi? What are you going to say to your kids when they ask, how do I be a good person?
I think that I'll say
Just stay at home, eat bread and
get
dessert.
all fat and sassy.
and
Yeah.
sassy.
I love that. I love that meme. Not real. I think that if they're asking me how to be happy is a different question from what's the purpose of life. And I think to be happy, I would say, strictly coming from like a procedural sense, love God, love your fellow man as you love yourself. Because I think that those establish the boundaries to help respect your own happiness, as well as also pushing you outside of your own self-centeredness. I think that sets your sights on a more objective view of what can be termed good and evil, even if you're in the different party systems trying to fight for good and evil. And I think that also just helps you to open your eyes to the other party, the other side, seeing what is that good. So ultimately, yes, we are here to have joy. Men are that they might have joy. But getting that joy, I don't think comes from focusing on what will make me happy.
You think it'll come from what makes other people happy?
I think it will come from loving God and loving our
that's right.
fellow man as we love ourselves.
What if I hate myself? Then am I good to hate everyone else too?
No.
No, just
You're
kidding.
good to eat bread and dessert, Tanner. Enjoy
Oh, yeah.
that. fat and
Oh,
sassy.
fat and sassy. I love that.
That meme's gonna be so outdated by the time any of our children listen to this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It'll be a good
Look it up.
insight.
Look it
We're
up.
not done.
It's the best
It'll
thing
be-
ever. Best thing ever.
Well, sweet.
point,
Well,
they're
thanks
gonna
for
put-
joining, guys. This was so fun. Yeah, I just encourage all of us to be good men, to be good people, and yeah, get fat and sassy.
Woo.
Okay, we've said it so many times. I'm gonna pull it up right now on YouTube, and we can watch it.
Yeah, we got to put it in the scene. That way they'd have it as the bloopers.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
I love it. I love it.
Okay,
I'll stop presenting for you.
thank you. Oop. There we go. Share. You guys seeing it?
I see it.
Very good.
Of snow will mean less people on the slick roads.
We'll probably sit around and cook some soups and eat bread and desserts and just get all fat and sassy.
I think my favorite rendition of that
Of
though
snow
is this
will
guy that's like, so what if you don't get married? What's your plan B? And then it cuts to her. Eat bread and soups and get all fat and sassy.
I can't tell you how many times I saw that meme just being pregnant and all the pregnant memes in the algorithm.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So real.
Especially when you're pregnant over the holiday season.
Ah.
That's awesome.
Oh my
Well,
goodness.
was the party, y'all. Thank you for such
That's
an
so good.
awesome, killer episode. We look forward to Nephi's tomorrow. So that'll also be fun. And I hope y'all stay unfiltered and get qualified. Ta-ta for now.
Yeah, there we go.